Daddy's Little Earner. Chapter 19. Falling Pregnant. My 16th birthday came and went, and Brian was released from jail, and there was no stopping me. Nothing was going to keep me apart from him for long. I would run away to see him at every opportunity, just as I had previously run away to see Dad. The staff at Bramington decided to let me visit him at weekends, willing to accept that we were in a proper relationship now that I had passed 16 and become legal. We were really in love. As soon as I discovered I'd fallen pregnant, I knew exactly when it had happened. The first time Brian had come to visit me at Bramington after he was released. We'd gone for a walk together. He'd been inside for all those months, so it wasn't surprising that we were both keen to make love. We didn't bother with precautions because I really wanted to get pregnant with Brian as a father, so I was delighted when I found out the plan had worked first time. It wasn't long, however, before other people started to undermine my joy and make me wonder if I'd done the wrong thing. The best thing you can do for that child, one of my less sympathetic staff at Bramington told me, cruelly puncturing my bubble, is to have an abortion. You'll always be an unfit mother, and that baby's life will be a nightmare. I'd had it fixed in my mind for over a year that I wanted a baby, something all of my own, someone to care for and nurture and be responsible for. Brian was keen too, not having managed to have a child in his previous relationships. I thought that if I had a baby, it would give me a focus in life. But now, this woman was putting doubts into my head. I'd thought that perhaps a baby would save me from the temptation to fall back into prostitution when I was next desperate for money. It seemed like my best chance of leading a decent, independent life. But maybe she was right. And it would be unfair for someone as worthless as me to bring a child into the world. It didn't take much to reignite all my insecurities about myself. Another reason I'd wanted to fall pregnant was because I'd read somewhere that girls who have had been abused when they are very young can sometimes be physically damaged inside, that they are never able to conceive. And I wanted to reassure myself that that wasn't the case for me. But now the seeds of doubt had been sown, all my old feelings of inferiority came bubbling back to the surface. What, I asked myself, made me think that someone as bad as me deserved to have a baby? I decided the woman must be right, that it would be the kindest thing if I had an abortion rather than condemn my child to a childhood as miserable as mine. I went to see Mrs. Macquarie and the matron and told them that I had decided to get rid of the baby. They listened to what I was saying, but Mrs. Macquarie seemed to be really off with me, which was a shock as I had expected her to be supportive of my decision, and her opinions meant a lot to me. My social worker, who thought I should have an abortion, escorted me to the doctor to get him to make the necessary referral. "Can you tell me why you want this abortion?" the doctor asked me, pointedly, not looking at the social worker as he talked. "Because everyone has told me that I can't have a child, and because I'm useless, and because of my lifestyle," I said, matter-of-factly. "But what do you really want?" he asked. I burst into tears. "I want this baby." "Well," he said, sitting back in his chair, "there's no way I'm going to recommend that you have an abortion when it's not what you want." It was like he'd lifted a huge weight off me, off my heart. I was delighted that someone was actually listening to what I wanted rather than telling me what they thought I should do. From that moment on, there was no chance. I was going to get rid of that baby. I left the surgery unable to wipe the broad grin off my face, ignoring my social worker's mutterings and grumblings. Once we got back to Bramington, I went straight to see Mrs. Macquarie. I'm not having an abortion, I said. Well, I should bloody well think not, she replied. Is that why you've been off with me? Yes. You're a perfectly healthy young woman who got pregnant on purpose. So why you then decide to get rid of it? It was because of what the others said. Well, bugger then, she grinned. We're having a baby, so let's get on with it. Once the staff realised that I was going to become a mother, they weren't sure what to do with me next. By that stage, I was refusing point blank to go into school, so I spent more and more time with Mrs. Macquarie or with the staff, and I happily set about knitting cardigans, bonnets and booties. Over the years that I had been at Bramerton, I had eventually formed good relationships with a number of staff members, even though it didn't start out that way. The people I got on best with were the domestic staff, and I spent most of my time in the kitchens with them. The housekeeper Renee and the chef were both great to me, and I learnt more from them than I had ever learnt from the teacher in the school. I would never talk to Renee about any of my emotional or mental problems, which was a relief. Her mission in life was to do with practical things like cooking and baking, and making sure everyone was warm and clean and well fed. A lot of the boys, many of whom were pretty hard cases and not long away from prison, found the same with the gardener, who used to take them outside to work with him in the vegetable patch. In the last year or so of my time there, the domestic staff actually became like my surrogate family. If I wasn't going to go to the school anymore, they said, I had to go out and get a job, which seemed like a completely foreign concept to me. I'd never really known anyone who had a normal job, and whenever people asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, all I could ever think to say was, I want to get married and have 4 children. Now that they were insisting that I come up with an alternative career plan, I shrugged and said, work in the shop. Couldn't think of anything else. But you're an intelligent girl, they protested. Don't you want to do more than that with your life? You could go to college, get some qualifications and have a career. I didn't really think I was good enough for anything else because that's what Dad had always drummed into me. But as they were now insisting I come up with something, I admitted I had enjoyed working with the disabled children in break. Clutching at this straw, they arranged for me to go to work in a local home for the disabled, a position that allowed me to live in a sort of supervised flat on my own. I could still see Brian when I wanted, so I felt quite pleased with myself. Maybe my life wasn't going to be quite such a complete failure as I had been anticipating. One morning, a few weeks later, I woke up with terrible pains and bleeding. The doctor was called and said I must stay in bed, and they should call an ambulance if the bleeding got any heavier. By lunchtime it was getting much worse, and an ambulance was summoned. I was petrified. Mrs. Macquarie dashed over to be with me, and she seemed almost as frightened and worried as I was, and insisted on coming with me herself. She held my hand on the way to the hospital, which meant a lot to me. She was still there as she wheeled me off into the operating theatre, and the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was her concerned face looking down at me. Have I lost my baby? I asked, and the answer was written all over her face. Yes. She nodded. I'm so sorry. I was devastated and wept for days and weeks on end. To be given something you want so much, something as wonderful as a pregnancy, and then have it snatched away again without warning, just felt unbearable. Brian was really cut up as well, but at least I knew now that I could get pregnant, and I was clear in my mind that I wanted a baby of my own. I was determined to try again at the first opportunity.